So this is the problem, right? I don't think that political parties are meant to be advertising outside of elections, right? You're not meant to see adverts or promotional things from them really outside of elections. Now, Farage has been making all these presentations, like in front of his, pedestal for reform, and they have all these conferences, but reform conferences and Labour conferences are meant to be for members of their party because they're conferring with each other, right? But yeah, it's being broadcast now and put out everywhere on the news and shown everywhere, so it becomes an advertisement. Now, your political parties exist, right? And they've got members. Now, they have candidates in elections. You're not meant to hear about the party is not meant to put out adverts for its candidates or itself, right? If it's not connected to an election, because if there's not an election on, there's no point having a political party, right? If there are no elections and no one to be elected, right, the political party has no purpose, right? It's pointless. It's only there to get people elected into government, right? That's the only point of it. Without any elections, the political party has no purpose. Its only purpose is for elections, right? And its policies are purely what it's going to do politically, supposedly when it gets into government, right? Now, really, you should only be hearing or seeing radio adverts, flyers, TV adverts, public appearances, anything that promotes or advertises or raises awareness of a party, but only through its candidates, because without its candidates, it can't do anything, right? When there's in connection with one election, and in the duration of period leading up to before to promote it, and then after the election, 14 days, it's meant to be taken down. Now, this is a thing, right? I know that if you buy a magazine and they advertise it in the magazine, you've still got the magazine, right? But the magazine is your own personal possession and it's in your own private home and property, right? It's not on the shelf, right? It's not on the shelf, in stock on the shelf, out on the shelves. When you hear a radio advertisement, you only hear it in that moment and then it's gone, right? Into the ether, gone, right? Same with a television advert, right? Unless someone purposely records it, and that's their own private recording, right? Because there are all copyright laws in place for recording anyway. Maybe you're not meant to be copying it unless it's for personal use. So someone else wouldn't see the advert if you'd copied it only for personal use. Because this is logic and IQ. You've got to put intellectual logic and IQ into this, right? There are lots of factors, but a poster is put out and then after in public, it's taken down from being in public, right? And adverts only run for the time and period that you pay for the advert to run on. So the only thing is like the physical copies, like you can buy vintage copies and things like that, right? But still, they're meant to be in people's private possession, right? Now, look, you might say, well, what about these liberal clubs? Like, they had, like, liberal clubs and Labour clubs and things like, well, that's the whole point. It's a club. When you join a political party and become a member, right, they all come together and they confer in public, right? They have meetings. But those meetings are for the members who are members of it to talk about what their policies are going to be, right, for when there's an election on, right? They're not actually meant to be advertising. They're not meant to be putting advertisements out in their deliberations. Their deliberations are within the club and only members are meant to be in the club, right? So it's meant to be contained within the club. Now, this is where Nigel Farage going skyrocketing sky high like the Rocket Man, right? Getting intoxicated on his own popularity and fame. And he's going in front of his Reform Party pedestals, right? There's conferences. They're conferring between members of the party, etc., right? Because they're members, right? And they're discussing their policies and so forth, what they're going to do. Now, that you're not really meant to, those aren't meant to be broadcast and aired. They're meant to be for members. It's a conference to confer with members and decide and, vote on what the party is going to be, right? It's not meant to be an advertisement or promotional, but it's become that because all the news are reporting on it, and they shouldn't really be reporting on private political party deliberations. They're for members only, right? Because they don't put their advertisement out until the election's on, and then they publish a manifesto on policy or what they're running on for that election. So the news and newspapers have started to completely break the law in social media when you've seen all this Nigel Farage in front of his pedestal with reform on it and Tice talking. They're only meant to be conferring with their members, right? It's not meant to become an advertisement for the party, because an advertisement for the party, you can't have an advertisement just for the party, right? Because what election is it for? There is nothing exists unless there is an election. It has no purpose, it has no objective, it has no point, and it has no goal without an election, right? So for reform to exist, if you don't have elections and you don't have polling stations, it's pointless, because they can't get anyone into government and they can't get anyone to vote for them and they can't be making and changing laws in Parliament, right? So they can only put adverts out in relation to particular elections, whether it's for local council, by-elections, general elections, mayor elections, commissioners, and things like that, right? And it really should declare every advert should actually declare not only who's paid for it, but which election that it pertains to. I think they probably likely will have to somewhere in the rules, but they definitely have to declare who's paid for it, because this is when you're getting advertised and promotional from private means, right? Like from the news, they're only supposed to cover the electoral processes, and to be honest, conferences and meetings within political parties, right? They're not electoral processes for an election, right? So the news and media have gradually been breaking the law more and more and more and more. Now, this is a problem where the law really wasn't being properly enforced, but from, I think it was 2001 or something like that, 2001, 2003, you've got it down here somewhere. This electoral commission was formed, right? Now, before the Electoral Commission was formed, if you think anyone broke the law, and if you think the news or newspapers broke the law, or the TV, and if you think the political parties broke the law, right, then you could challenge it with an election petition, right? You had the legal right to challenge it, and there are also offences you've got to call out for the police as well, right? The police don't challenge the election itself to say whether someone was or was not elected, but the police could fine people for the certain offences, right? Around elections, right? For fines and penalties, although not usually for the content of the advertisement itself, because usually it's exempt for the content for the effects on people when it's lawful within the election time. In fact, actually, the police should be prosecuting for material outside of the election time, right? But not for like things that you're allowed to have obscene things or things like that, because the election law really is under the parliamentary law, right? But the content of the messages in it is the part of it that's quite heavily privileged to what they can say, right? But it's to do with the timing, the time when it is not allowed to be out there, which is meant to be being enforced, right? Now, with the obstruction of the deposits for the election petitions and the fact that, apparently elections ought to be free and the cost can be absorbed by the local area for those election petitions, but I don't know what's going on with the election judges, but all these fancy lawyers from the main political parties ended up completely blagging it and the law on it, and they've ended up starting to, get their cost claim back, and then apparently scaring people from bringing an election petition because people say that it's going to bankrupt them. Now, actually, if everyone goes around and threatens people to say, oh, you shouldn't bring an election petition, it'll bankrupt you, right? That's actually deterring people from bringing an election petition, right? Misconduct against petitioners and other people soliciting business in order to every House of Parliament, right? To deter people. So if any lawyers or political parties or these top lawyers who are actually saying the words, oh, election petitions, I'll bankrupt you, right? That's actually frightening you. That's actually frightening and scaring people. So any lawyer or barrister, any of these top people who are acting for Labour and the Tories in election petitions, all these top election petition lawyers who are telling people an issue and who are actually saying, oh, election petitions will bankrupt you, right? That is deterring people from doing it. So they're all under arrest, right? They're all under arrest for contempt against Parliament, right? Every single lawyer who has ever said that statement from their mouth, right? You are under arrest, right? Contempt of Parliament. You are deterring people from challenging an election, right? They're scaring them, right? In fact, if they're acting as a body and doing that, as a barrister's chamber, or if they're doing it as the Solicitors Regulation Authority have issued that statement, if the Solicitors Regulation Authority ever said, don't bring an election petition, it'll bankrupt you, right? That's a Terrorism Act 2000. That is using a threat, right, to disrupt a political process and deter people from doing it as a organisation. So that's a Terrorism 2000 Act. So if you've got large numbers of barristers who are under an organisation or group who are all saying that, like the guy who Nigel Farage is using, going on GB News or whatever and saying that's terrorism, right? And you need to understand this intellectually with your IQ. You need to know the law, right? They're scaring people from doing it. Now, the government have set this ridiculous deposit, right? They've got this ridiculous deposit of $5,000, which no one can afford anyway. Graham Moore is a perfect example of trying to challenge an election recently, right? And he failed. Now, election petitions are meant to be accessible by the public. You can petition Parliament over election issues, but supposedly not one seat alone. But Parliament are rejecting the petitions and not letting us have them. They're censoring them illegally on the e-petitions, which I've complained to Daniel Greenberg about, right? There is an argument under the legislation in the wording, right, that says that when they gave the powers to the courts to be allowed to hear elections after 1868, it says in the wording in the Act, it says the High Court, right? Now, you could argue if the High Court can include the Supreme Court, but it can be the High Court, but there are different courts in the High Court. There's like the King's Bench. The King's Bench is the High Court, but then also there's the Family Court, and then you've got the Court of Appeal. But it's called the Court of Appeal, right? Well, is it the High Court or not? Is the Court of Appeal the High Court, or is it a court within the High Court, right? In Erskine-May, what's actually got these controverted election rules in it, which say that you can petition Parliament still as long as it's not one seat, Erskine-May suggests, and this is advice from a clerk, right? He suggests that Parliament is the High Court of Parliament. It's the High Court of Parliament, so it's a High Court. It's one of the High Courts, right? So the argument is, if you can prove in a court that the High Court of Parliament qualifies as a High Court, or one of them, like the King's Bench is the High Court, like Westminster Hall was the High Court, the Family Court, the Court of Appeal is the Court of Protection, the High Court, right? They're all High Courts within the High Court, right? Or around it, It is the Supreme Court, the High Court. When it says the High Court, can something be heard in the Supreme Court? If it can somehow get into the Supreme Court, right, then it's not the Royal Courts of Justice, is it? But it's still a High Court. So on that basis, you could technically argue that Parliament is a High Court, and actually I can petition Parliament about a controverted election one seat, right? Now that's a separate argument to be had, right? Which could bypass the £5,000 the £5,000 deposit, right? Because you don't have to pay for your petition in Parliament. The thing with in the courts is it's meant to be convenient for the local area. That's the whole point of it. Is it's meant to be convenient for the local area, right? It didn't used to be £5,000, and 4 people can sign that petition. But if you petition Parliament, and if it's a big issue, and if it's really important, and a lot of people are concerned about it, right? It's not limited to 4 people signing it, because if you petition Parliament, there is no limit on it, right? So you could have 1 million people petitioning Parliament, and this is when you get onto things like the Michael Westwood petition, which complained about the election. It said call a general election, but it on the basis in it was because of the electoral campaign of Labour. It was saying that, they'd said all these things. They stood on certain premise to vote for them, and that what actually had turned out to be false, right? So it was a false representation, basically. To sum it up, he claimed false representation, right, of Labour. That's what you can, if you want to argue with me on that, you can. But I think that Michael Westwood's evidence, which summarised it in literally 1 or 2 sentences, was it effectively meant that it was false representation, right, for an election. And that was his basis and evidence, and 3 million people signed to that. And then Jamie Stone said, "Oh no, we can't do anything about this. It has to be the King or Starmer," right? When actually, no, they could have actually put it through under controverted election rule, right? Because he was complaining about misrepresentation in an election, even though he prayed for a general election. They could have found another remedy. You pray for something, but then they've got to decide. They can decide what they're going to do with it, and they could have given a different remedy, right? Now, this is the thing. Let's go back to this whole thing with the political parties, right? So, gradually over time, people aren't bringing election petitions, mainly because, elections are... In England, we don't have elections like in America, when they have loads of elections for the Attorney Generals, the sheriffs, blah, 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 mayors. In America, they have lots and lots and lots of different elections. In England, we have fewer, right? And in fact, until they started bringing these police and crime commissioners in and these regional mayors, you only really ended up going voting when it was a councillor or an MP, really, in England. That's all really that was mainly left, right? Until they started to bring a few more in, but they have them at the same time. So they happen rarely, and a lot more people used to be members of these Labour clubs and Liberal clubs and things like that, because it was part of the social order in society, right? But it was still limited to the clubs and members, and the canvassing of the advertisements was strictly for a certain period of time, right? Now, this is the problem that we've got, which has happened. Now, even though there was lots of members of Liberal clubs and Labour clubs and things like that, I still don't think that many people are interested in law except lawyers, right? And the councillors and the actual MPs themselves. So, not many people are interested in law itself. And then for the particular niche area of law of elections, even less people are interested. And back then, you weren't going to get the information on the internet, right? You were going to have to buy law books, particularly on elections, right? Go to even W.H. Smith's might not have had it, or you go to maybe in the library, they might have had a little bit of a section in the library, but it depends which library you had in the local area. You might have had a good library or a bad library, or someone else might have been borrowing the books, right? You could go to a library and read books in it, but which books did they have, So it was all about limited information, and even now, you cannot get anybody interested in this, that you cannot get, even, if you go in groups of people, they don't really, you can't hold their interest in it. If you try to explain it to them, they fall asleep, right? So to enforce this and get people interested in it, it mainly would have been like the people who stood in the election who lost, or who were standing, the candidates who were going to be disgruntled, right? Now, because Labour and the Tories are winning all the time, right, and anyone else doesn't really have a real reason to, a real chance to win, not reason, a real chance, that there isn't really a chance to win unless, the Lib Dems would, you'd have thought the Lib Dems would have been calling them out on this election law more often, right? But because they ended up with a monopoly on it, right, these big parties were pretty much, undefeatable and unchallenged. So, and they're the ones who were getting all the lawyers and are paid for the lawyers, expensive lawyers, and particular lawyers who can blag people, right? And they ended up with a monopoly on it. And then they're the ones who are in the government all the time making rules upon it. And, you know, and if any of these big two parties ended up breaking the law, you know, and if they didn't call them out on it for a while, you know, the longer and longer, if any of them were breaking the rules and they didn't act, it becomes a conspiracy then. It becomes like, you know, concerted, right? If any of these two big major parties were breaking the rules and they let the other get away with it and then they both started doing it, they're all in, right? It's like, you know, it's do or die, right? It's like the freight trade, you know, it's like that's it, we're all in, right? They're all in, like, they've broken the law, they're fucked, they're not going to confess, or both their whole major big parties are, you know, they're fucked, right? They're absolutely, you know, condemned, right? So, and this is really what's happened to the Electoral Commission, who started in the early 2000s, and they've been incompetent, they've not really been intelligent, and they've not really done the job properly. And now when it's coming under scrutiny, the Electoral Commission are like, oh, no, we're doing this right, we can't possibly have done it wrong. No, you did it wrong, you're fucked, you know, you've been misled, and you haven't been intelligent enough. Now, I want to say this, the Electoral Commission, right, are mainly focused on the distributing of the material on behalf of, you know, the local council or the government, and the processes of distributing the ballots, collecting the ballots, the polling station processes, the counting of the ballots, and going to the, you know, these counting sessions when it gets counted, and then they have the little declaration, right, which is the press are allowed to cover that, right, because it's the electoral process, the results, right, the results of the election, right, to let people know who won. Now, the Electoral Commission are really focused on that. They've not really been that focused and savvy on what happens outside of those specific processes, the canvassing that the parties are up to. I think they've been concentrating on the spending and things like that, but like when it comes to the canvassing of it, they've been completely slack. Now, they were given powers in the early 2000s to take things down, take down powers, to issue notices, right? They should have been really making a lot of use out of those powers, but they haven't. They haven't used them, right? Now, when they were formed, there was only really the main parties' websites, right? There was only really the main political parties' websites and like maybe some forums. And then you've got the political clubs, and then, you know, when they put adverts out, right? Now, what reason would the Electoral Commission have to, you know, take a radio advert down? It'd be pretty hard to take it down on the radio advert, you know, after it's already been on. Like, you know, if it was on like once, like 1 week on once, right? You can't take it down, right? You know, you can't issue a takedown notice for a freaking radio advert, right? That was on like on a Tuesday at 4 o'clock after it's already been on, right? And then they had flyers which were distributed, you know, if there was any legal errors with the flyers, but not usually the content of them, because usually the content mainly should be privileged to a certain extent more than any normal documents, because they're using the law of Parliament. So you've got things like the obscene publications and things like that, but it's to do with the time, mainly the timing of it, you know. And obviously the police aren't really supposed to interfere with those election material either if it's within the electoral time, right? Now, you get problems if people are mixing petitioning Parliament on a cause and matter with an election, like they did with Sadiq Khan, Get Khan Out. That brings complications into it, because if you are doing Stop the ULEZ, which is a parliamentary cause and privilege, but it has elements of, you know, Get Khan Out, the Mayor of London, you're mixing two categories together, like Class E and Class F material in the Control of Advertisements 2007, right? So that adds complications to it, and I don't want to argue about that, because that is complicated, and there are a lot of separate arguments, very, very constitutional and technical complicated arguments to be debated about that, particularly now in the social media. But let's go back to when the problem really started to get worse or started to arise. The websites, right? Now, this is the thing. when the Conservative Party have a website, right, is it advertising the candidates or the party outside of an election? Well, this is the thing. Is it members-only website, right? Now, how do you know about the website? Now, look, Nigel Farage needs to be challenged on this on his podium. And I would, I'd challenge Farage on it, 1-to-1. I'm up for the legal challenge against Farage on this, at least on the legal points, right? If he wants to argue the law, I'll get a lawyer to argue on his behalf, right? If there's no election on, and there isn't any elections on, right, then no one is meant to see a party really or know about it, because they can't do anything. There's no point. Now, you say, well, there are elections, right, and there are political parties, and they've got a government. So, okay, now, if you join a party, a political party, you're a member. And when you go to those meetings, surely, people who are members, right, you need to talk and discuss what the party's going to do, right, for its policies when it gets into government or when it's in government, but only for members. Now, how did you get interested in that party? How did you know about that party, right? How did you know it exists? Because you were walking around, in public, you're knocking around in public, and then, suddenly there's an election on, right? And, I don't know who to vote for. Well, look, there's a man walking down the road. Oh, hello, I'm canvassing for the Labour Party. Why don't you come and vote for us? Why don't you vote for us? There's an election on now. We've got a candidate in, it's Nigel Farage. Well, what's he going to do? Well, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. These are our policies, right? Why don't you join our party, right? Join our party and you can actually have a say in what our policies are, right? Now, that's when you first become aware of a political party, because if there wasn't an election on, right, they're not having any understanding. So you only find out about it through an election. Now, after the election's over, you aren't meant to see any material about the party at all, right? Because there's an election on and no one's been elected, right? They've got people in government and they're doing certain things, right? Now, those persons, though, are members of a party. They're members of an organisation. But you wouldn't have known about that organisation unless there was an election on, right? But because you find out about it through voting, right? It's like, how do you know there's a fishing lake, right, when you go fishing unless someone casts a line out, right? If no one tells you there's a fishing lake there, you don't go to it and you don't get a fishing rod, right? Now, when there is, a fishing competition or contest, people say, hey, why don't you go to it, right? And then you say, oh, I like fishing, I might join the club. Now, this is the thing. This is all to do with members of political parties. And this is questionable around, looking back now, around the clubs, the Conservative clubs and the Labour clubs, because they all served alcohol and they had a bowling green and they had cricket clubs and all things like that. And they associated with, they called it, the Liberal Club, right? Now, is that advertising a candidate or election? It's not advertising a candidate or election, but it's promoting and advertising the party, but it doesn't necessarily to tell you to vote. It identifies, if you've got a Liberal Club, right, and on the wall it says Liberal Club, right, it's like, oh, that's the Liberal Club there, right? It's not asking you to, it's not saying come in and join the Liberals, right? It's not saying vote for Nigel Farage, and it's not saying, vote for Keir Starmer. It's identifying itself as, oh, this is a Liberal Club, right? So it's like going into the men's toilets or the women's toilets now. It's like, oh, I went into the women's toilets. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realise, right? It's not, it's actually, you're not allowed to have secret societies. I think that they're illegal. There was some law out that secret societies are illegal, right? You're not allowed to have them. So to not have a sign on there, to not say that, if you didn't identify that, oh, this is the Liberal Club, right? This is the printers, this is the cobblers, this is the shoemakers, and this is a Liberal Club. All right, I know which fucking building I'm looking for now. It's identified that it's a Liberal Club. I didn't go into the wrong fucking building, right? This is like Nigel Farage coming out of the polling station when it says Conservative Club over the top of it, right? So it's not like you can get into, look, right, so for trademarks, right, so a trademark is like, effectively, you don't pay VAT on a trademark because it's the mark that you trade with. So it's like the mark that you identify the brand with, identify the brand to other people. It's registered with the government to an identification, right? And that, I think the trademark does qualify as an advertisement, actually, because if it's a picture or a photograph, it's like it can be identified as art or a picture, but a trademark is actually specifically an advertisement. So you could actually say that. So when you got a Liberal Club or something like that, and it says Liberal Club outside, it is advertising to the public that it is the Liberal Club, right? But this is the thing; it's not saying to vote for them, right? And it's not saying that they've got a candidate on our election, but it exists. So you can have the Liberal Club with the name of the building on it, right? And you can have the members, but it's meant to be, really, those type of clubs were supposed to be for members only, right? And when they went in them, when they're deliberating within those clubs with the policies for elections or who's going to stand on that, it's meant to be within that club. They're not meant to be publicising it unless there's an election time, right? It's only meant to be publicised at an election. That's when you find out about it. And then, you know there's a club there and you can join it. Outside of elections, the Liberal Club is meant to be kind of like, it's meant to be contained, right? Contained within its members, who deliberate within it. And this is a problem now with Nigel Farage, that you can see, you've seen him absolutely everywhere, Farage making statements in his conferences and with his members and so forth, and it's not actually what they're actually doing. It's not a conference, it's actually an advertisement, and it's been advertised all over social media. It's been advertised, shared and promoted. It's that they're promoting a reform deliberation, right? A reform conference between members. The newspapers and the magazines and social media are now, it's a promotional. They're promoting and advertising the party, and what election, which election, and within 14 days of which election. This is the thing. It's become a 24/7, 365 days a year promotional advert for Nigel Farage. Can't be legal. It cannot be legal, and he's getting that promotion for free of charge. He's not claiming on national spending or implied spending or anything like that. People are just giving free promotion as well. Now, and even if there's no costs to it, well, there is some cost to it, because everyone has to pay for a mobile phone and everyone has to pay for their internet providing service, and there are costs into a lot of these things, even things in the background, on videos or all kinds of different costs, right? It's complicated, the costs, but effectively, right, I think that the website shouldn't have been, because how does anyone know you've got a website? And then you've got a Google search engine, if you're looking for it, right? If you're looking for something to find out where it is, like, what street is this on or what street is that on, it's not an advert or promotion, because otherwise, why would people advertise on Google? They wouldn't need to have any adverts at all. They would just wait for people to search for them, right? So the websites really were only there for the members to find them and to actually put the printed matter out and the radio matter out. They've got a website, like you say, if there's an election on and it's a reform advert, you say, vote for Nigel Farage, in this election, reform are going to do this or that. I come to our website, right? And you can read it, right? I don't know actually whether those websites should have had the information about the party on there outside of any election, unless you're a member, like special login for members or whatever. Just says this is a Reform website, right? It should say this is Reform members login, or if there's an election on, it could actually show the material. I don't know, but this is when you're starting to get these complications, because look, right, before websites in the internet, right, they put the advert in the magazine, someone buys it, it becomes their own personal property, right? You can't copy the advert or further circulate it from yourself, right? It's not on the shelves in the shops available on display. Like the radio advert goes into the ether, the TV advert goes into the ether. Are you supposed to be recording the TV with a VHS properly, unless it's for your own personal use, right? That's the basis, right, if you want to get technical and complicated on it, right? Now, the problem is that I don't think that unless you were one of these people who were, you got a lot of people who vote Labour, right? They had a lot of voters, and the Conservatives had a lot of voters, but not all of them were members of the clubs, right? And not all of them, was as interested in the law around it. Most people just get the thing through the post, they'd go to vote, and then they go vote, right? And they all stick together in their, they all were sticking together in their groups. It was a cultural thing, right? It was almost like a football team thing, wearing a football shirt type thing, right? But there were laws for wearing colours outside polling stations. There was actually a law. I don't think if anyone's ever been prosecuted for that. I don't know if anyone has been prosecuted for having the colour of a party outside a polling station. It is a law. It would be interesting to know if anyone got prosecuted for it. Maybe in the 60s, 70s or 80s they might have prosecuted someone for it, right? I don't know. You see, that was a law, but no one ever got charged with it. It wasn't ever enforced. This is the thing. So, at the time, with the between 1998 and 2005, when people are getting their Microsoft computers and some people going online, things like university people or college people who are doing courses in that or teaching politics and things like that, I think it was questionable around the websites, but what's happened is if you would have wanted to challenge anyone, you could have complained about it and you could have brought an election petition if there was an election on, right? Or outside of an election, or you could have reported it to the police, right? But very few people were interested in elections when it wasn't election time, right? So no one was really, the general public were not really scrutinising what was going on with these political parties, right? Obviously, only the minority parties who were trying to become a political party might have called out the main parties, but did they read up and know about the rules properly? Like the Monster Raving Loony Party was more of a joke, right? It would have been the other candidates, the other people who were trying to get elected, who would have been the ones who should have called the bigger parties out on it. But if they've got bigger lawyers and more money and more muscle, then and more blaggers, and they were saying, don't take us on, you will bankrupt you, we'll bankrupt you, boom, Now, if you've got these candidates in an election who are all, little tiny pipsqueaks or whatever, independent people with no party behind them, and very limited money, or very small parties, and if the Labour lawyers or the Conservative lawyers were saying, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough, we'll fucking bang you, will bankrupt you, right? That is a Terrorism Act 2000 offence, right? And obviously only from 2000 onwards, right? So if any lawyers for the Conservatives who work for them, right, Reform lawyers or Labour lawyers, if they as a company or business or chambers or anything like that have said, come and have a fucking go at an election petition if you think you're hard enough, we'll fucking bang you, we'll bankrupt you, boom. That is a terrorist offence under the Terrorism Act 2000, right? Because you are using a threat against someone, right? A threat to deter them from an electoral process, right? Election petition, right? Now, normally you can say to someone, don't hit me or I'll sue you, right? Or, if you steal my things, I'll sue you or I'm going to prosecute you. Don't hit me or I'll prosecute you, right? That's not disrupting an electoral process, right? It's not a threat of an electoral process. If you're walking down the roads, and someone's going to punch you and you say, if you hit me, I'll sue you, right? Or I'll prosecute you for assault, right? That's not disrupting an electoral process. Let's get this clear. So when these lawyers who are representing for political parties are saying things like, to Graham Moore or anyone like that, or bankruptcy, right? That's terrorism, right? Let's get that clear. So that guy who was on, from Nigel Farage, who's representing Nigel Farage, God, I don't know what he's been saying on the radio, right? He's been going on the radio and making certain statements. I rang him up and complained to him. I said, why helping Farage? Because his Talking Pints programme can't be legal, right? So this is the thing with these big hotshot lawyers for these parties. Just to intersect here, there is an argument, and I need to just this is like a brief side thing, right? It's like a side point, which is sort of disrupting from my main flow. But there's an argument, and I've complained to the Judicial Conduct Office about this, right? That was, did in 1868, when they gave the judges the powers to decide election petitions, was that creating a new privilege, right? But, apparently Parliament can't give itself new privileges, but was it giving itself a new privilege that it didn't have to... It was giving itself a new privilege in a way, because when it gave the powers to judges and justices to determine election petitions, who was the winner or not, was that giving a new privilege? Well, actually, did it give themselves a new privilege? Did the members of Parliament and the House of Commons and Lords, did they obtain themselves a new privilege by letting the justices hear the election petitions, right? I say yes, because they gave themselves, they excused themselves the new privilege of excuse. Oh, we don't have to do it. We don't have to deal with it, right? They had the privilege of not having to deal with all those petitions, right? They gave themselves a new privilege of not having to receive all those complaints and have to sort through them, with the petitions committee and, send them off to a committee to investigate it. They didn't have to deal with it anymore. It's like, no more chores. We've got the privilege of not having to deal with those chores. Like, what chores have you got to do today, right? We've got to, empty, clean the fridge out, go collect the milk, clean, hoover the carpet, get a secretary in, clerk's got to come in, sergeant at arms, what chores have they got to do in the House of Commons? Oh, right, we've got the chore of all these election petitions coming in, complaining about, cheating against the members, right? Oh, we don't have to deal with those anymore. Let the judges do it. Oh, they're giving themselves a new privilege. We don't have to deal with those anymore, right? Surely that's creating a new privilege if you look at it that way, right? So I think that they did give themselves a new privilege of excusing themselves from having to bother with it, right? But that's my own opinion in 1868. Now, the problem with those elections is this. Election processes are meant to be paid for by the taxpayer, so they're free, as in, you don't have to pay to access it, you don't have to pay to go to vote, It's run by the state, It's absorbed by the taxpayer, right? Now, when you petition to Parliament, you send the petition by post for free, and they're meant to, investigate it and call for documents, persons and papers, right? To look into it. Parliament would investigate it, but after they gave the powers to the judges, then you started getting lawyers involved, right? I don't think they had I'm not sure if you could get a lawyer involved. You might have got a lawyer to draft the petition properly and to put the claim in to Parliament, and you might have had to pay for the lawyer for that, but you could have complained in yourself. Now, I don't know how they dealt with that, whether the lawyer was privileged or not, and etc., and what they did with the money and funding. I'm not sure, but the what about the cost when you're doing a petition yourself for the investigation? You know, this is the thing. I mean, when you submit your petition, is that the full thorough investigation? You know, have you gone around and investigated it, got all the evidence, and then submitted it yourself? That's the question. But I think that if you won and if you were right, I think that you might have got the money back. But we'll have to check on that. But there was no financial barrier for raising the claim, I don't think, because I'm pretty sure that you could send it in by post for free, and if you just essentially write the main, you weren't allowed to attach too much evidence to the petitions. Remember? Oh no, yeah, you wouldn't have attached too much evidence because you couldn't annex stuff to it. You couldn't really annex that many things to it, so you would just obviously set out like essentially what you knew about it in the petition. So I think it was Parliament who called for documents, persons, and papers, right? So that's free. You don't pay for that. So it's like elections ought to be free. Now, this isn't the Bill of Rights. Elections ought to be free. So once they started putting all these deposits and, things like that, and then they were involving lawyers in it, and it becomes a legal case, and then the other party want to claim costs, that you're getting charged money for an electoral process, right? To have it checked and validated, which can't be right. And then when you get to the fact that they're even frightening you and putting you off or obstructing you with a deposit and then threatening to bankrupt you or whatever, the rules state that there are lots of different ways the judge can deal with the finances of it, and it says that it can be absorbed by the local area, and it should be. So when these lawyers for Reform or the Tories or the Conservatives are wanting to claim loads of costs and things like that from the other party, really they shouldn't be claiming it from the other party. Really, it should be from the state, although they don't want people just to bring frivolous and vexatious claims which are unsubstantiated, but usually most claims are quite serious, But obviously, back in the early sort of like, before the 1800s, there was a lot less people voting, right? It was more like, bribery, buying people drinks, and smaller. It was normally like petty offences to do with elections, really. But this is the thing. Now, it's all, it doesn't matter if someone buys someone a drink to go vote, because it's hardly going to affect it. Unless, obviously, like in that Reform election, it was on 6 votes. If you paid someone to vote, it would matter. But it's all about commanding large numbers of people. So that it's, if you can't command large numbers of people, there's no point. And this is why it's very, very important to call out Reform on what they're doing in the newspapers and the over social media, because it's completely messed it up, because it's all about swaying massive amounts of people. That's what the game is now, and that's unfortunately what Nigel Farage set out to do with Talking Pints. He knew he was going to be standing in the election, and he knew he was going to be the candidate, yet, they used Talking Pints, which had private money, to help raise his popularity, and it can be proved. It could have been proved in an election court that Farage intended to enter the election, and he had been given this TV spot, he was getting paid for it, they were promoting his name, and he was getting very popular from it, and he knew that he was going to be standing in the election, and he knew that the effects of that would affect him. Now, in the civil court, I think it's a balance of probabilities. It's not like, reasonable doubt, but you're unlike, how many people voted for Nigel Farage? To prove it in an election court on balance of probabilities, I don't know if you would have to go as far as actually calling them all as witnesses. Like how many? Like if 20,000 people voted for Farage, or if like 10,000 people voted for Farage, I don't know the exact figure because I'm talking into my phone now. I can't Google it, but let's say 15,000 people in Clacton voted for Farage. I don't know what the number is, right? But you would have, if you wanted to do a thorough investigation and actually ask every single person before you voted for Nigel Farage, had you seen Talking Pints, or had you, heard about him on social media, etc. And if, and if a certain number of people have had, right, then that that Talking Pints had an effect on his election. But then you could say, when when you'd seen Tice, if you ask all the people who voted for Tice, did you see Talking Pints? Oh no, but I saw Nigel Farage on Talking Pints, and I know that it's the same party, and I thought, hey, I might vote for them, right? This is where you'd have to ask all the people who voted. Now, the police aren't going to fucking go around and ask 20,000 people. They're not going to knock on 20,000 doors or telephone 20,000 people. The police could, effectively, if the police gave a toss about it, right? If the police gave a fuck about election law, right? If they cared about it, like they do with Madeleine McCann, like, and I'm not saying that, the missing child is any less or more important than an election, right? I'm not saying that because, obviously it's important for people's safety and children, and it's really upsetting what happened to Madeleine McCann. But just as an example, a lot of police resources went into that, right? What you could do if you're a police officer in Clacton-on-Sea, right, is you could... The police, it wouldn't be too much money, probably cost as much or less money than, sending someone out in a police car, for half a day, right? You could get some flyers, right? Because the police will have access to the voting for that election, right? And so forth. The police could get 20,000 flyers printed, witness appeals, and they could go to the government and ask for the actual register of the names, and they could actually write letters in the post, right? You didn't need flyers. They could write letters because flyer or a letter. There's not a difference between a flyer and a letter. The police could send letters to everyone who voted for Nigel Farage, 20,000 letters. I don't know whether that cost £20,000 or not, because remember, you can get 10,000 flyers for something like £75. But as for delivering them, maybe the delivery of them is going to be the cost. But if it's in connection with an election, though, I don't know whether you could get Royal Mail to deliver it for free, because it concerns an election. I don't know about that. The police, but obviously, the police is government, isn't it? So it's going to be absorbed by the taxpayer anyway. If it's the police, sooner or it's going to come down to taxpayer if it's police, right? So they could send out letters to everyone who voted for Nigel Farage in Clacton, and they could just ask a questionnaire. Could you please tell me, have you seen Talking Pints? Right now, this is the thing. If those people like Farage and support him, they're patriots, they back reform, right? And if the police are questioning them over it, might not tell the truth. Like, oh, what's this? Why do you want to know whether I'd seen Talking Pints or not? Are you going after Nigel Farage, my hero? Are you going to prosecute him? Oh, I'm not going to answer these questions. Or they might lie and say, oh, no. I didn't want to see Talking Pints, right? And this is when you want to, this is why the government want to get into, AI surveillance and fucking Oracle and, having everyone on facial recognition so they can just go into the phones and look anyway to see if they saw Talking Pints, right? But this is the thing, balance of probabilities are that if people in Clacton did see that programme and if it did influence them or not, leading up to Farage's election, then you could prove it in a court that, he broke the election law and he wasn't duly elected, right? Or they have to rehab the election again, or if it's widespread. Now, we know that Tice and Lee Anderson got popularity off that programme as well, as did Reform generally through all its candidates. And that's what set the ball rolling, right? And this is the thing that the Electoral Commission don't want to do. Now, fair dues, right? At the time of Nigel Farage getting elected, I didn't know this, right? I've only just learned it since the 2024 general election, right? Because I just started getting interested in the election law a little bit. I knew a little bit about it and a little bit about the basic principles, right? Now, this is the thing. At the time, right, when Talking Pints was on, at the time Nigel Farage had declared that he was standing for reform in Clacton, at that point, people should have said, hey, just a minute, he's got those Talking Pints programmes on, and, this is going to influence his election. In fact, we think that he knew that he was going to stand when he did that programme, and he intended it to boost his popularity in the lead up to it, right? Now, at that point, that is when you're meant to contact the Electoral Commission and you're meant to say, excuse me, Nigel Farage is standing in this election, right? And he's got this Talking Pints programme, and we think that it's boosting his popularity, and we want it taken down, right? Because we think that he knew that it would boost his popularity. Now, that's when this guy here that we're looking at on the screen that I'm holding in my hand here, this with a purple background, this university boffin electoral commission guy, right? Who I've been criticising heavily, right? This is when he and his colleagues are meant to use those powers, takedown powers, right? And say, oh, just a minute, Nigel, we've heard that you've got all these Talking Pints programmes on GB News, you've got to take them down, right? Sorry, because it's affecting your popularity. And you are a candidate in an election, right? There are 60 million people in this country, or 60-odd million people in this country, who aren't standing in an election, right, Nigel? And they don't need to take their material down. But you are. Like, look at you. You're on the hotspot. You're in the limelight. It could be you. It's a 1 in a million. It's a needle in a haystack, Nigel. You are in a infinitesimal minority of people, like, that they'll look at lottery winner. Oh, I'm standing in an election. I'm a candidate, right? Oh, well, what have you been up to? What things could have possibly been affecting your popularity at this time, at this exact time now, Oh, well, anything to declare? Well, I just happen to have been on Talking Pints, and it's made me into a mega star, and I've been having Priti Patel on, Jim Davidson, and every celebrity under the sun, and rubbing up my shoulders to make me really, really, really likeable to the Conservatives and put their trust in me. That could affect the outcome of my election and voting. Would you like to ask anyone in Clacton if they've seen those adverts or know of them? And how about my other colleagues who are running for the party as well, like Tyson Lee Anderson, right? But no one did. No one did call it out, right? Now, the Electoral Commission, they're in the business of elections, right? And they've got hearsay, and they're in and amongst political parties, and they're walking around and they're in contact with the government, and they've got their own mobile phones, right? I find it difficult to believe that the staff of the Electoral Commission, being their main subject leading up to the general election, and it had been known that there was this party called Reform out there, I would find it a bit hard to believe that they hadn't heard through some whispers in the wind or hearsay that Nigel Farage had been doing Talking Pints programme on GB News, right? I find that very difficult to believe. But did they issue any takedown notices for it? No. Did they sweet FAs right? They didn't. And this is the thing, this is when we get into this. Look, right? Here's Carla Denyer, right? Now, she ran a campaign. She ran a campaign, and all the costs were accounted for, and all the spending, and she put a Facebook page up for Carla Denyer, and she's got all these photographs in the background saying, vote, right? Vote in the election. Vote for Green or vote for her. It says vote for Green, but it says vote, right? And she's put here, look, want a Green Party MP in Bristol Central, I'm your candidate, right? So she's a candidate in an election, and this is what this is for, a candidate in an election. And I think it even says on Zach Polinsky's Green Party leader, published and promoted by the Green Party, with their address. So he's saying that this is published and promoted by the Green Party, and also all the costs involved in it as well. Because look, right, this is the thing. This is what you need to understand on this, right? Look, you can run ads. You can pay for adverts. You can pay for an advert on Facebook or YouTube, and you select that you're a political party and it's a political advert, right? And you've got to show your passport and ID. This is what Mark Zuckerberg created, for Americans, but they've been using it in England. And you're categorised as political. But this is not an paid for advertisement, but it doesn't matter whether you're paying for it or not. It's advertising and promoting the party. It is advertising and promoting the party, right? And it's got advertisements and pictures on there. And this is the thing, right? You don't pay to have the advert heavily distributed, but it's to the public at large or a section of the public, right? And there are sections of the public where the algorithms are going to show these, or people are going to happen upon them in groups when people are sharing them, right? So it's still an advertisement, right? And the thing is that it's not just the costs of printing the advert and making it available to the public, like putting it on the radio, broadcasting it, or putting it on TV, or printing the leaflets out, right? This material here that Carla Denier has got had costs, right? It had costs for all those signs that they're holding, and they all had to travel to get there to make that photo. Now, if all those costs were incurred by the Green Party, fair enough, right? The costs of the advert were incurred by the Green Party, but for the purposes of getting members of the Green Party, including Carla Denier herself, elected into Parliament. And she's got it here, that, and this is for my candidate. But here she's only got her name, Carla Denier, but underneath it says MP for Bristol Central. So she's Carla Denier MP. So she is the MP for Parliament now. Now, it says 14 days after the election, you've got to take election material down, right? Obviously, on the radio, you don't take it down because it's not there. It's gone into the ether, poof, right? And in the magazine, they were available. And now they're not available anymore because they're not out on the shelves in the shops, right? They're in the hands of private persons. But those private persons can't copy it because it's for themselves, right? In their cupboard or whatever, for their own private use, right? They own it. It's their property, right? They're not supposed to be further publishing it, and definitely not at an election time, right? Making further copies of it. It's under copyright, right? Fair use is, for yourself, right? But under normal copyright rules is for yourself. But then you've got the additional rules of the election campaign on the top of that, right? Now let's just go to her page. Actually, I'm going to change pages now. So here we go. Carla Denier MP, right? When contacting this member, they should be addressed as Carla Denier. Right. House of Commons. So she actually does not actually have her social media on here at the moment. So she hasn't actually got her social media link on there. So I'll give her that. She's not actually got it on there. And this is Carla Denier MP at parliament.co.uk. So that's not advertising like Hotmail or Outlook or Gmail. It's Parliament, right? It's only promoting the government, and there's the address, and there isn't actually even a phone number there either, right? There's no phone number. So let me just check another Green Party member. We'll check Siam Berry. Right, so Siam Berry, right? This is her contact details here for Parliament, like Carla Denier had, right? It's not advertising any party. It's not advertising any political party at all. But underneath here, it's got Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So this Facebook is a for-profit platform that runs advertisements and makes money, right? So is Instagram. Instagram is a for-profit platform that makes profit. It's a big entity. And this is also, these are American platforms. They're American founded and they're operating on American policy, right? So let's just click on Siam Berry's Facebook, right? Here. So Siam Berry, so she's your MP for Brighton Pavilion, right? But there isn't anything on Siam Berry's picture at the top saying to vote for her or the Green Party at all, right? Nothing. And she's declared it as MP, right? But this is to contact the MP because it was on the MP contact page, right? It was on the MP contact page. So if it's on the MP contact page, what other purpose can it have right, than contacting your MP, right? So, and it's also got links to, various other things. Now, that picture there she's got pinned doesn't actually say vote on it. Knocking on the door.
Amongst the Green Party's promises are 150,000 new council homes per year across the country.
I don't know whether that was an election voting form or not. That could have been a voting ballot form. So this is the thing. Now, she's got stuff that she's meant to now have things that she's doing as an MP on here, right? It's meant to have things that she's doing as an MP. It's meant to have things that she's doing as an MP in her local area for her constituents. Now, here, look, she's got this picture here saying vote Green, right? And she's got a little dog next to it, so I don't know whether that's making a point, right? The best thing, I think we'll go into the photos, all her photos. So this is Parliament featuring a means of contacting an MP for constituency, surgery and business of someone who has completed and finished an election as a candidate, which is over, and now they've got the title of Member of Parliament, right? Now, this is where all the photos are. Now, there's an advert for Vote Green there. There's some more adverts for Vote for the Green Party here. And down here, these are also... Now, you see, this is where the Electoral Commission now will start rolling their eyes round. They'll start rolling their eyes round and tutting like this. Like that, the little tut, 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 and roll their eyes. But this is serious, right? Parliament have provided a means of contact for a member of that House for the purposes of holding surgery with that MP to people in the local area who they claim that there are very strict rules and regulations around. And when we go to this means of contact for the MP who is serving to Parliament, we find quite a lot of electoral material here, right? When it's after 14 days of the election, right? Even saying to vote for this person. So Parliament is promoting material that tells you to vote for the MP again, right? All year round, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? And the Electoral Commission is just like rolling their eyes, just like going, oh my God, like, you're just like, tut, 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 like, so what, so what, so what? I mean, so what? The Parliament, right, is put a link which has got material on to re-elect their MP, or the constant effect of a promotional, which this is wrong. And this is the problem with Nick Clegg, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to the Green Party and I'm not opposed to Simon Berry, right? But this is what Nick Clegg effectively, although Parliament wasn't advertising Nick Clegg, right? They wasn't advertising his radio show in Hallam, right? But this is a thing. So it's like, this shouldn't be on here. Because this is like, it's still available, right? Now, if it was in someone's magazine in their own house, right, it would be their own personal thing. It wouldn't be on the shelves in the shop. It wouldn't be being broadcast on the radio. It wouldn't be being broadcast on the TV. It wouldn't be constantly being reissued by the newspapers, right? This is the problem. So this is where the Electoral Commission can't be enforcing the law at all. Now, if they want to say the law's changed or it's not the law anymore, if you take away that law, so there's no regulations around election adverts, you might as well just have, Donald Trump just you might as well have Donald Trump just, put vote for Nigel Farage all year round, all around the UK on every billboard. No, he can't do that. He's an American. He's foreign, yeah, but he's buying it in England. Yeah, he's paid for it in England, right? This is the thing. Well, that's always to do with spending, and it was paid for it. It's not just the spending. The Electoral Commission are trying to make out, right, that it's only to do with the spending. But Talking Pints was to do with the spending, right? Farage didn't pay for Talking Pints, and he didn't have any implied or notional spending. The Electoral Commission don't seem to believe that all this affects people's vote, that it influences people's vote. Oh, there's no influence here. There's no influence here on an election, and because this election is finished, right, we don't care, right, because Sian Berry's already an MP, right? But what about next year? This is encouraging you to vote for her again next year. Parliament and Sian Berry in her constituency office is not meant to be saying vote for Sian Berry unless there's an election on, right? And it's not meant to be advertising to tell people that the message being ingrained into their mind to vote for her. Now, she serves as an MP and she does her job, and if their constituents think she's done well, they might vote for her again. But anyone who hasn't voted for her, who just visits the website, who wanted to contact her, right, look, right, if you are a constituent in Brighton and you did not vote for Sian Berry, but she's your MP, right, and that means that she is your MP, and that's the person who deals with your parliamentary matters, whether you like it or not. Now, when you go to her contact page and you click Contact Sian Berry, right, this page pops up, and it says that you can contact her on here as an MP. And when you're contacting her as an MP, as someone who did not vote for her in that election, and you're going to the MP contact page to contact the MP who is your MP in Brighton, who you might not have voted for, you might have voted for Reform, and you come on her page to contact her, right? And you're looking through her photos, it's saying vote for her, right? It's saying vote for Sian Berry. So you're being encouraged and asked and persuaded to vote for her. But then you might say, well, there's not an election on, right? But that message is being continually put to people who didn't vote for her, but she's their MP, that maybe they should vote for her, right? And then as it gets closer and closer to the election, right, within 14 days, then you're within the time limit to bring an election petition. You can say, well, this has influenced all these people, all of her constituents, to vote for her, who never did vote for her because she put adverts out saying, vote for me, right? Now, this is where the Electoral Commission, they should have had this all taken down. Now, this has got to do with this, right?
Hey, Nick. Hey, Mark. I hope I'm not interrupting. You got a sec? Have you got Oppie with you? I think Oppie's still in the virtual forest.
No, I don't have Oppie with me, Nick, but I've got loads of election adverts that have been run 365 days a year and promoted by Parliament. Could they encourage people to vote for someone who didn't actually vote for them before? And, even though it was paid for by the party, are active serving MPs meant to be using Parliament itself to help advertise and promote their individual campaigns, or just meant to be there as an MP, right? This is the thing, Nick.
But I always have time for you. What's going on? Look, I just love the presentation so far. It's
well,
such
actually, what's going on, Nick? All of the election adverts are going on, Nick, and they're staying on. They're going on and they're staying on. Nick, right? How about this? Why don't we just, have, vote for Nigel Farage played on the radio, like, every 5 minutes, like radio. What if the BBC just had a little break every 5 minutes saying, vote for Nigel Farage, like every single day, or we could play you a Beatles song, maybe Nigel Farage could release a song, like vote for Nigel Farage, and the BBC could play it all year round, like the Beatles, love, love me do, vote for Nigel too, maybe the BBC could have a record out called Vote for Nigel Farage, it could be in the charts, top 10, vote for Nigel, or it could be like, there could be a song called, Why love Nigel Farage 364 days a year when you can love him 365, you know?
Such visionary stuff. But as you mentioned early on, with all big technological advances, there are inevitably going to be all sorts of challenges and uncertainties. And
Well, there aren't going to be any there aren't going to be all sorts of challenges, Nick, when there's a £5,000 deposit required for an election petition, because no one can afford it, Nick. There aren't going to be all sorts of challenges at all. Not when the lawyers are saying, "Oh, we'll bankrupt you." Well, the threat of bankruptcy to everyone scare them so they don't bring them, right? Because that's terrorism by the Terrorism Act 2000, Nick, right? So there aren't going to be all sorts of challenges because no one was challenging it. Oh, there's all going to be all sorts of challenges. No, they weren't in Sheffield Hallam because no one challenged you, did they? So Nick knows that there aren't going to be any challenges because the odds are that people can't afford it and they're scared and they don't even know the law. This is the challenge. There's all going to be, yeah, I'm bringing the challenge. There's going to be all sorts of challenges. Yeah, I am bringing the challenge now. This is the challenge, Nick, right? You know, there's going to be all sorts of challenges. You know,
I know you've talked about this a bit already, but people want to know how we're going to do all this in a responsible way, and especially that we
You're not doing it in a responsible way, are you? What you're doing, Nick, is you're completely irresponsible. You've acted illegally to obtain a seat in Parliament, which no one challenged, and then after not bringing the election law up to date, you then went and led Facebook International, knowing that election law was being broken, and then knocked out this amount of video to basically confess it, dropping out innuendos that, oh yeah, we know all about this, but, you know, oh well, you know, this is the progress.
Part in helping to keep people safe and protect their privacy online.
Yeah, that's right. This is incredibly important.
The way I look at it is that in the past, the speed that new technologies emerged sometimes left policymakers and regulators playing catch-up.
No, Nick. The speed in which the progress of the platforms jump forward, Nick, has given all of the political parties a massive advantage and boost. Increased their popularity. They've totally broke the law, just like you did in Sheffield Hallam, and just to make sure that all this potential of independent people and other views don't overpower these parties and make them extinct, you completely, totally ignored that law and have completely and totally abused it. You've got all of the MPs in on it. You made them think that it's okay to do it when it's not. And now none of them want to confess it because they've literally all broken the law, and Facebook has totally broken the whole system, right? Because the Electoral Commission are not enforcing it, right? That's what's happened, Nick.
And companies get accused of charging ahead too quickly.
Oh, no one accused. Companies get a charge of charging ahead too quickly. Well, that's what I'm doing now. That's what I'm doing now, Nick. I'm accusing Facebook, YouTube, and these platforms of charging ahead too quickly. And not only that, the government are promoting them on their websites. The government are featuring and hosting links as an MP's contact, which has got election material on there, right? And the government haven't kept up with the legislation. If the government even wanted to change the legislation, what are they going to make it as? That, you know, there aren't any regulations around it anymore. Oh, you know, technology is so advanced now that we're not going to have any regulations around advertising. So basically, you know, it's a complete free-for-all, right? And you might as well then say, well, let's just let Elon Musk and just, you know, why don't you just have Elon Musk, you know, make it so that, you know, Green Party adverts pop up all the time, or Green Party pages appear in the algorithms all the time, right? You know, this is the thing. It's not playing catch-up. The legislation was fine, right? The problem is that no one was abiding by it. And the problem is that Nick was the last person who was going to abide by it because he didn't abide by it even on the radio, right?
The other, tech people feel that progress can't afford to wait for the slower pace of regulation.
Well, you don't need to afford anything when everyone's promoting your party for free, do you? You know, you don't need to afford anything, Nick, do you? When you know, Mark Zuckerberg's, you know, using his platform to promote your party. You know, or everyone is just sharing it around, you know, Facebook, or Parliament are, you know, promoting you for next year, you know. So, you know, or Nick Clegg, or whoever, Oh, Nick Clegg doesn't need to advertise himself to his constituents because every time his constituents visit his Parliament page, it goes through a link to contact him telling, oh, yeah, vote for Nick next year as well, Vote for Nick next year.
And I really think that it doesn't have to be the case this time round. Because we have years
They're spilling the beans. I really think it doesn't have to be the case next time around. Oh, like your radio show. I really don't think your radio show had to be the case in an election petition because no one brought one. Got slipped through the radar, didn't it, Nick, right? Didn't have to be the case, did it? Because it doesn't have to be the case when there's a £5,000 deposit on it. Doesn't have to be the case when, you've got lawyers going, oh, we're going to bang you, we're going to bang you with costs, we're going to bankrupt you if you dare challenge it. It doesn't have to be the case, does it? Terrorism.
Round. Because we have years until the metaverse we envision is fully realised.
Oh, we have years of election material being promoted by Parliament. We got years and years of putting the photographs in front of you. Whenever you contact Nick and go to his contact page, vote for Nick. Oh, look, it's Parliament. Look, here's Nick MP's contact page. I'll go to it. Oh, look, just while I'm here putting a message, I notice all loads of vote for Nick. We could just have all that on the radio all the time, Vote for Boris Johnson. I'm quite surprised Boris Johnson didn't have a song called some kind of spitting image song, called Bouncy Boris, vote for, Boris Johnson, don't vote for Boris. You don't need to, you vote, whatever, I can't think of a slogan at the moment.
So this is the start of the journey, not the end.
Like I said earlier...
Well, no, it's the start of a journey. What he means to say is, hey, we've just been dropped these massive platforms, Facebook, YouTube, X. They're completely and utterly breaking the law. The Election Commission aren't enforcing it. I know that. The legislation hasn't been changed to accommodate for it. And even if you did, what are you going to do? Just say that, oh, yeah, we can do what the hell we want.